Today on Freedom Alive, David Barton, an American historian, shares startling facts about how our American history was rewritten by a president of the United States. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Today you'll meet David Barton, founder of Wall Builders and an American historian. David has dedicated his life to the study of American history and the Judeo-Christian influence in the founding and development of our nation. He's constantly fighting against efforts to rewrite our history. I'm joined today by our co-host, Matt Staver. Matt, America is such a great nation, and we have so much to be proud of. I'm looking forward to David unpacking critical race theory and its impact on the future of America and our educational system.
Yes, and we hear this term critical race theory, and David will go through what that actually means. And more so, he'll actually look at the foundation of critical race theory. What is its purpose? What is it founded in? And not only that, he's going to share with us some amazing history, and frankly, startling, because most people probably haven't received this history, either in public or private school, not only about American history, but about Black history as well, which is frankly startling, it's encouraging, and it really goes against this whole narrative of the critical race theory, which is really designed to split us apart, to have an oppressor and an oppressed, to cause division, ultimately to cause destruction of America, the longest living constitution on the planet. Every other, as David has clearly said in his writings, the average length of time for a constitution of any government is 17 years. And America has been going on for over 2 centuries.
Thanks, Matt, for that information. For those of you at home, it's a privilege to bring this to you. But next is our Freedom Alert.
A Christian flag case goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court. This is a case that began in Boston, Massachusetts, to celebrate Constitution Day. It's an annual day, September 17, around the country in which we celebrate the United States Constitution. Camp Constitution, which actually teaches young men and women about the Constitution and our Judeo-Christian history and heritage, wanted to celebrate the Constitution on Constitution Day in Boston, Massachusetts, the cradle of freedom. And in fact, they issued an application to have an event. It was going to be about 1 hour. It was in a place that Boston's public policy for the public says it is a public forum, meaning that anybody in the public is welcome to use this on a first-come, first-served basis after submitting an application. They wanted to celebrate the Judeo-Christian history and founding of Boston and Massachusetts, the Constitution, and the founding era of the United States. They issued an application, and the application said that they wanted to fly this Christian flag on this public forum flagpole. Now, up until this time in 2017, there had been 284 applications of private groups and individuals to fly their private flags on the flagpole designated as a public forum. Not a single one had ever been censored in the history of the 12 years prior. 284 applications submitted, 284 applications approved. What were some of those flags? Well, some of those flags were the flag of Turkey. Some were the Cuban flag. Some were the Chinese flag of Communist China. These were individuals that weren't celebrating necessarily the countries, but they were celebrating the Chinese American community in Boston and Massachusetts, or the Cuban American community, or the Turkish American community, or you even had the LGBT, and you also had the rainbow flag and the transgender flag. Many of those flags and many, many more were actually allowed to be shown, including the Bunker Hill flag. Now, the Bunker Hill flag, if you've never seen that, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's the opposite color scheme of the Christian flag. The Christian flag is a white flag. Up in the corner is a blue square, and in that square is a red cross. The Bunker Hill flag has a reversed color scheme, but it has the same almost identical symbols. The only difference is it has a tree also in addition to the cross that was allowed to be flown in honor of and in celebration and memory toward the Bunker Hill situation. But now, after 284 requests, after 284 approvals, 12 years of consistent permission, 2017 comes around, Camp Constitution puts on the application that it wants to temporarily during its event raise the Christian flag. It was denied. Why was it denied? Because it's called the Christian flag. The person who was the individual who denied it said, if you had called this flag anything else, just a flag, Camp Constitution flag, whatever, just don't call it Christian. It's the word Christian that caused the censorship. Even though if you look at it side by side to the Bunker Hill flag, it's identical almost to the T, except for the color scheme. But because of the word Christian on the application, it was denied. Liberty Counsel filed a lawsuit. We've litigated this several times up to the Court of Appeals, and now it's pending before the United States Supreme Court. Is this just about the Christian flag? Is it just about Boston? No. This is a much bigger issue that's now pending before the United States Supreme Court. And the question is, can government censor your viewpoint simply because it's religious, or in this case, because it's Christian? The answer to that is and must be unequivocally no. Continue to monitor this case. It's the Camp Constitution case at the United States Supreme Court. Well, our very special guest on Freedom Alive is David Barton. He is the founder of Wall Builders, has the largest collection prior to the mid-1800s. David, welcome to Freedom Alive.
Matt, great to be with you.
You have the largest book collection, I think, that many the Smithsonian institutions would love to have. Tell us about your book collection, your involvement in American history. Give me a little bit about critical race theory. We've already done a program with you on that, but I want to talk more about some other history that I think people will find very fascinating.
Yeah, we have about 120,000 items from before 1812. So we have thousands of original documents, artifacts, considered probably the largest private collection in America. Among that, we definitely have the largest individual collection of what we would call founding era or pilgrim era kind of items. It goes back through Jamestown and Plymouth. It goes to the early colonization of America back to 1526 with Spanish. So in that time frame when America is being founded, we have just remarkable items. And it's not just documents. You can see around me here, we got a lot of artifacts as well, a lot of items in there. So from that, we use that to do history works. A lot of what we have contradicts modern narratives for sure. A lot of modern narratives are created by newspapers rather than by historians, et cetera. And so we try to help set the record straight on a lot of stuff and point people back to original truth, original documents, so they can know what the truth is.
So give us a little thumbnail sketch of critical race theory, and then I want to look at some early developments in information that I think people will find fascinating regarding our American history.
Yeah, critical race theory right now is, it capitalizes on America's overall lack of historical knowledge. We know less about our own history than at any time in American history. The polling numbers right now are abysmal. We really don't know much. Whereas 92% of immigrants pass the immigration test, which is history and government questions, only 7% of high school seniors can pass the same test. For our immigrants know so much more about America than we do. So capitalizing on that lack of knowledge, critical race theory comes out and says, hey guys, we all understand that America was founded as a racist nation. It was that way from the beginning. White people have always oppressed black people. Don't mention the fact that actually we're the only nation in the world where whites fought whites and freed blacks as a result. We won't talk about that. We won't talk about that blacks did not have the right to vote at the 13th Amendment, but whites voted freedom for blacks, and then whites voted to limit their own hands so that blacks could vote as well. We won't talk about that. We're just telling you, all whites have always been racist. The abolitionists, there weren't any white abolitionists because they were all racist. It is unbelievable. The critical race theory says all whites have always been racist and all blacks have always been victims, and that's just not true. There are so many outstanding black historical individuals we no longer know today. The American founding was fully integrated despite what we hear today. Now, there was slavery at the time, but not near the degree that happened later by the Civil War. And we just don't know enough to push back against critical race theory. We want to do the right thing, and we want to feel guilty about anything that may have happened wrong. And absolutely, definitely, there has been sin in America's history. There's been slavery in America's history, but there's been slavery in every single nation in the history of the world. It's just that America got rid of it faster than other nations did. But, well, actually, we were the fourth in the world to end slavery out of 124 nations at the time. 1865, we're number 4. Number 1 was Great Britain in 1833. But still, we're at the top of the rack when it comes to doing the right things. We were the first in the world to ban the slave trade. We were the first region in the world to ban slavery. New England, every state by 1804 had passed abolition laws. So we were always among the leaders, but nobody knows that today. So critical race theory divides us. It's the Marxism thing that you have to have two groups fighting each other. That's how you progress in the nation. So now we're going to set races against each other, and that's how we'll make progress. No, that's how you destroy a nation, which is what they want to do. They want to move from the free market system to socialism, from the Republican form of government we have to a socialistic group oligarchy type form. So this is necessary for them to transform America. But Americans are, right now, we're willing participants because we just don't know our own history the way we should.
Tell us about that history, because I think it's fascinating with regards to the African-American involvement in the early American history and the American Revolution.
Yeah, if I take you back to that time frame, man, we have a massive collection of documents and heroes from then. I'm just going to show you some faces, because so many times when we talk about people, if they don't have faces and we can't connect with them, you really don't know who or what they are. But this is John Morant. He's from the American founding. He actually was in the American Revolution. As a 14-year-old, he became the first Black American successfully to evangelize Native Americans, Cherokees, Hausa, Catawba, various tribes. His story was one of the two best-selling Black narratives back in the founding era. Aluda Equiano from England was the other. But this guy, I mean, talk about market penetration. The hundreds of thousands of copies that sold all over America. He was known. He was a hero. Very little know about him today. Crispus Attucks, John Adams said this is where the American Revolution began. He said it began with the shedding of the blood at King Street and the Boston Massacre. The first patriot down was Crispus Attucks. So this is where the founding fathers looked at and saw the American Revolution began. This is the Battle of Bunker Hill. The hero here is Peter Salem. Peter Salem, on the day that battle occurred, Peter Salem, there were 13 white commanders that said, this guy's the hero. He's the reason we're all alive. This guy needs to be commended. Another Black patriot that day was named Salem Poor. And by the way, as a real individual, here is an actual document signed by Peter Salem, the only document known in history to have been signed by Peter Salem that's still in existence, but a great hero. And all these stories I'm pointing to were actually told in a number of books. This is a book from 1851 by William Nell. William Nell is the first Black man to serve in the federal government, but he did this book of the colored patriots of the American Revolution. That's his title on it. It has more than 100 genuine heroes, not just participants, genuine heroes in the American Revolution. By the way, while I'm there, the American Revolution was fought as a volunteer army. We volunteered to fight. Your term of enlistment is about 6 months. On average, Black Americans served 9 times longer than white Americans in the American War for Independence. They re-enlisted on average 9 times throughout the war. So there is not a single battle you can find in American history where Blacks were not a participant, and very few where you can find where Blacks were not heroes in that battle. So it's significant. In the American Revolution, all units were integrated. Blacks and whites fought side by side, and so many heroes. If I take you to Phyllis Wheatley, this is kind of like an early USO performer. This, what a great lady. She came here as a slave, but was freed, became the first Black poetess in American history. This is actually her poetry from back in the day. She wrote poems about George Washington, George Whitefield, others. George Whitefield actually had her come to the military camp and read poetry to all the officers. So it's kind of like an early USO, support the troops. And Phyllis Wheatley, George Washington brought her in, thought she was just phenomenal. You have James Armistead. This is the reason the American Revolution ended when it did. He's the first double spy in American history. He's the guy who got word to Lafayette and George Washington where Cornwallis was going to be at Yorktown. Because of that, George Washington got there before Cornwallis did. They were able to trap Cornwallis and end the American Revolution. And so what you have here is you have literally a Black man is the reason that we got this thing ended, and Washington and Lafayette acknowledged that. And it's interesting, the American Revolution started with the death of a Black man, ended with the intelligence work of a Black man. You can't cover the American Revolution without telling the story of Black patriots. And by the way, Washington had 76 generals. 28 of them came from foreign nations. We were a melting pot. You see all the women, the role they played, Hispanics, the role they played, Blacks, the role they played. We get none of this. Benjamin Banneker is a Black scientist, did the first Black almanac in America. He laid out the city of Washington, D.C. at the request of Thomas Jefferson, who was a surveyor there. Lemuel Haynes, he served in the American Revolution. He's the first Black man to receive a degree of higher education in America. It's interesting, there is a picture of him. He's pastoring churches back in the American founding. And if you see, the congregation's all white. So he's a black pastor of several white churches in the American founding, very common, not at all unusual. By the way, he's the first black man to have a sermon published right here. This is his Bible from back in the American Revolution days. And so you have a patriot like that. You have Wentworth Cheswell, who was elected to office in New Hampshire as a black patriot in 1768. He made a Paul Revere-like ride. For 49 years, he's reelected in American history by white voters. And by the way, nobody even knows that we had blacks elected to office back in 1641, Matthias de Souza. So we've heard none of that. And, you know, I can just keep going through all this stuff. The point is, we knew this stuff. We knew it really well. 3 years later, William Nell came out with this, which has the patriots not only of the American Revolution, but of the War of 1812. Then by the time you get the Civil War, this massive book is the Black Patriots in Civil War and the War of 1812 and the Mexican War and the American Revolution. I mean, you just had so much. The problem we have today is we know none of these guys. And the reason we don't is right here. There's a 5-volume set. I won't pick it all up, but I'll pick one volume up. This is The History of the American People by Woodrow Wilson, done in 1902. Woodrow Wilson at that time was a professor at 3 different universities. As a result of this 5-volume set he did on the history of the American people, the progressives and the academics said, oh my gosh, what a brilliant guy. So he's made the president of Princeton University the next year. They said, a guy that bright ought to be our president of the United States, becomes president. But what's interesting, in this series he did in 1902, he does not have a single black in any page at all. There's not a black hero anywhere, not a black patriot anywhere. They're all gone. He doesn't even have Frederick Douglass, who is more photographed than Abraham Lincoln. He doesn't have Booker T. Washington. He doesn't have George Washington Carver. He has none of those guys. It becomes a white-only history. This is what progressive done. They took over education. That's what we've had since that period of time. And by the way, in case you've never seen a black, he does show you what one looks like, and it's a very Neanderthal picture. It's a very demeaning picture. This series of books was used to write the script for the first Klan recruiting film. It was called Birth of a Nation. Woodrow Wilson, his books used to write that. That's the first movie ever shown at the White House. Woodrow Wilson did 2 showings of that Klan recruiting film, and then he brought back the revival of the Second Klan of Washington, D.C. I mean, it's racist. The reason we don't know black history today is, thank you, progressive, you purged it all. And one other thing I'll point out related to this is Woodrow Wilson directly acknowledges Darwin. He says he's a social Darwinism. He believes in social Darwinism. Darwin's taught him so much. And Darwin, his book is right here. This is Charles Darwin, Origin of Species. And if you open that book up, this is the one where it talks about evolution and evolution of animals. So you have his Origin of Species here. And if you look for this book today, you can buy it online, but it's only called The Origin of Species. Let me read you the rest of the title. It's The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Darwin says evolution's all about favored races. Now, in this book, Origin of Species, he wrote about the evolution of animals and brought man into it. In this series called The Descent of Man, Darwin says, now let's talk about the evolution of man. He says, the darker your skin is, the less evolved you are. So he was in favor of colonization, that we send dark-skinned people back to Africa till they fully evolve. When they get fully evolved and their skin turns light, then they can come join us in America. This is the stuff Woodrow Wilson was doing and promoting. And the reason we don't know black history today, and it's not that it doesn't exist, there's so much documentation, I'm surrounded with it. We don't know it because of progressive education and leaders like that who took it out. There is so much to be proud of with black history. I speak at black churches regularly, giving black history, which is a weird thing for a white guy to be the only white guy in the church. It's a black church giving black history. It's because nobody knows this stuff today, but it's well documented.
David, this is astounding. Let's go back to this Woodrow Wilson and this 5-volume set. What year were these volumes released?
They were released in 1902. I'm going to stand up here, Matt, to show you the full set. That's the full set. The 5 volumes, this is the history of the American people, except it's a white racist history of the American people. He had to delete so much history. So 1902 is when this comes out. And progressives fully took over education by 1920s. They changed the pedagogy of education, 5 different things they changed. We're not getting into that right now. But progressives took education, and this became what we studied. This philosophy is what guided America, and it still guides us today, which is why we don't know all these black heroes that I've shown you and hundreds more that we should know.
You know, it just makes you angry that this has not been taught in our school systems. Even in many Christian schools, a lot of this is not taught because it's just warmed over something from the secular educational system because they're trained in the secular education system.
That's exactly right. You hit it exactly. We got Christian schools, but they were trained in secular education systems that were very progressive. So we may have Christian values attached to it, but we're still doing progressive knowledge, which is not a good deal. But if we knew all this stuff, what's the chances that the 1619 Project could get away with saying what they say? We would never put up with this nonsense if we knew our own history. And even, you're right, even Christian schools have not done this because so many of those educators, so many of those who write the textbooks for Christian organizations were trained. They got their PhD from Harvard or Yale or wherever it was, some progressive institution. Even the progressives today don't know this. This was intentionally taken out by progressive in the early 1900s. But most progressives today, when we show them the Black history facts, they have no clue. They thought America was always racist. They have not a clue that it was not that way at the beginning. It became that way under the work of a lot of racists as they got really racist. In the 1700s, you can see some, but it's a small portion of America. 3 out of 4 founding fathers were anti-slavery. They were not racist. We don't know those names today. We can point to a few slave owners. We don't know the rest. And so that's the way American history has been. And certainly throughout the South, racism was much more abundant than anywhere else. But racism exists in every nation, every people group. It's just part of human nature, unfortunately. That's why we need a savior. That's why we need our heart changed so we don't have that racism. But that's just the story of the world. But the story of America, it's unfortunate we don't even know our story anymore today.
So you really start off with the pillars that Washington talks about: religion, knowledge, and religion, morality, and knowledge.
Yes.
And those are foundational. Then you come to the 1800s and you have Charles Darwin and you have Darwinianism. And then you have this social Darwinianism that if evolution is true, then the evolution of society has to also be true. And therefore, we're progressing into a better society. So there's some races that are less favored than other races, exactly what you just quoted in Darwin's title of The Origin of the Species, talking about favored races. That's a very racist ideology. That then gets picked up by individuals in the progressive educational movement, and that then changes our history. Why? Because social Darwinianism wants to eliminate blacks and wants to eliminate certain people of different origins, wants to eliminate other kinds of individuals. That's the foundation of Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, Adolf Hitler, and Hitler in the Holocaust. And so now we're seeing that here. But if we knew the history, like you said, as soon as somebody said the 1619 Project, you would just simply say, oh, that's just absolutely ahistorical. It's contrary to historical facts.
Yeah, we would look at 1619 Project and say, oh, that's another one of Aesop's fables. You know, we would just laugh at that. That's another story told by Hans Christian Andersen. It's a kid's story that nobody believes. It is unfortunate that we no longer have that. But one of the best things everybody can do is push back by learning this stuff. I mean, I'll just go to a book that we have, The American Story of the Beginnings. We have so many Black patriots in there. We bring them back. We think everybody should know these guys. And if every American simply knew this and started telling their kids about it and telling their teachers about it and telling their school officials about it, we could gradually turn this thing. It's not going to take massive laws to do this. It takes just a growth of knowledge. And so I love Song of Solomon 8:13. It says, your friends listen to your voice, so speak. I've only got a Facebook with 12 friends. Great, talk to them. Tell them about American history, the way it actually happened. That inoculates them. This is the vaccine against 1619. Truth is the vaccine against 1619, which is not truth. It is retelling America's narrative. And they say that, by the way, up front. They say this is not about history. This is reshaping the narrative of America. And that's what they're doing. It's not about being accurate. That's not what they're after. And they acknowledge that. What they want to do is have you think differently about the country. The vaccination for that is to know what the truth is, because when you know the truth, it'll set you free.
What's the final words you'd like to leave with our viewers? And I want to also mention your website, wallbuilders.com, wallbuilders.com, and also the book. I want you to mention that as well.
Yeah, the word I would leave is today, to know the truth takes a lot of work. You're not going to get it in any textbook anymore. It's not going to pop up in the media. It's not going to be on your social feeds. You're going to have to work to find it. All these things around us, these are all online. These have been online literally for decades since we've had the technology. All the stuff is out there, and a lot of professors know this and write this. They just don't get much credit with it. So today, if you're going to know the truth, you're going to have to work to find the truth. It doesn't come to you easily anymore. You can't trust that your schools are going to give it to you. Put the time in to go find the truth, know the truth, defend the truth, and then teach the truth to others.
And you have a website, wallbuilders.com. You have a recent book that you have released. Tell us about that.
That recent book is American Stories, The Beginnings. It goes back from the time of Columbus. We're told as a great slave trader, not true. And it goes all the way up through the end of slavery, the end of the Civil War. It looks at the abolitionists, et cetera. It looks at the founding fathers, all that they did to fight slavery in their time against Great Britain. So there's a lot there that gives you the proper narrative, and it's all footnoted and documented, but it's not an academic book. It's an easy read book, but it gives you all the academic notations for it.
And I highly recommend that book. I have a copy in my library as well, along with many of your other books. Wallbuilders.com is an excellent resource if you want to learn about our true American history. And frankly, you'll be surprised by it because it's history that you likely have not ever been taught in your public schools or even in your private schools. Wallbuilders.com. David, thank you for being a guest with us on Freedom Alive.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate all you do, brother. Bless you.
Thanks. God bless.
Matt, that was an amazing interview. David Barton is incredible. And I'm reminded with what's happening in Minnesota, in so many states where this is such a legislative and legal battleground around this issue, just how important it is for those at home and we as parents to be involved at the local level so that you really know what your local school board is advocating or even mandating about the education of our children.
Yeah, even if you're in a state that has passed a law that bans critical race theory in the classroom, you have to look at school by school by school, school district by school district, because despite that, some resistance is happening even in those states. So I encourage parents and other people in the community, even if you don't have children in the school, find out what's happening in the local school. Go to the school board meetings and get involved, because this is critical. If we don't know our history, we're going to repeat the bad aspects of it, like socialism. We know it doesn't work. Why are we even talking about it as something good? We know historically, if we know our history, it's a miserable failure. People die and people suffer under a socialist Marxist regime.
For those of you at home, stay tuned every week to Freedom Alive. We will continually strive to bring you this information to keep you informed and aware so that you can make the best decisions for your family to protect yourself and your family. Well, that's it for today. But be sure to tune in next week where we'll update you on existing battles and alert you to new government overreaches. We'll tell you about the victories people of faith are winning and how you too can fight back to keep your freedom alive. Watch Freedom Alive every week on this same channel at the same time.